You know, when it comes to movies, you often hear people say they don't make them like that anymore. And that is very true in the case of today's movie. In fact, I'd almost go so far as to say that they never really made them like this. As horror movies go, Wolf is kind of in a class of its own. On the surface, it's a werewolf movie for sure, but it's not exactly your typical werewolf movie, and there's quite a bit of nuance to it. I've certainly never seen the subject matter tackled from this angle before, and I've always found it fascinating for that reason. It's less outright horror and more of a psychological study on human nature versus animal instincts. Jack Nicholson plays Will Randall, the editor-in-chief of a publishing house, and in the opening scene he runs over a wolf with his car while travelling through the mountains in Vermont. He goes to check on the critter and gets bitten. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes, bitch. The wolf then runs away into the forest nearby. Will goes to his doctor and gets a rabies shot. The doctor laughs off his suggestion that he could have been bitten by a wolf in Vermont because there are no wolves in Vermont. Well, if that isn't some ominous foreshadowing, I don't know what is. Will is invited to a party at his boss's mansion, at which he's dutifully demoted from his role as editor-in-chief and told that he's being redeployed to Eastern Europe. Because if you want to show someone how little you think of them, then there really is no greater way to do it than by arranging a party to celebrate their impending misfortune. So it turns out that Will is being replaced in his former role by his best friend and protege Stuart Swinton, played by the always terrific James Spader. Special note, if you're planning to cast someone in your movie that has to outsleaze Nicholson on screen, then there really is nobody better than this guy. Stuart is all, "Oh, I didn't even know until today, but say the word and I'll turn it down." And Will just smirks at him, realising that he has been stabbed in the back by his best bud. Will's not feeling great, and when he's outside walking the grounds of his boss's estate, the nearby horses have a freak out. This is where he meets his boss's daughter Laura, a bit of a wild child, who hands him her glass of whiskey. He downs it and they have a quick chat. Over the course of the next few days, we see Will exhibit heightened senses. He also feels younger and healthier than he has in years, so he becomes suspicious that the wolf has transferred some sort of mystical powers to him through his bite. He drives out to his boss's estate again to tell him to shove the Eastern Europe offer up his arse. While he's there, he bumps into Laura again and takes another of his turns. She puts him up for the evening in her guest house, and when night falls, he wakes up with the damnedest 5 o'clock shadow I've ever seen. He has a hankering for a raw meat feast and runs out into the woods. We cut to the most obvious stunt double in the history of cinema as he hunts down a deer and chows down. In the morning, he wakes up by a brook, remembering nothing of the night before. We have all been there, bud. He arranges to meet with a shaman witch doctor, who is clearly played by a young man made up to look like he's about 107. I don't know why they've done this. Just cast an older actor. The doctor tells him that he has likely been gifted the spirit of the wolf and that he will most likely eventually transform into a wolf entirely. Will is like, fuck that for a game of soldiers, and asks if there's any way to prevent it. The doctor gives him a medallion and says to wear this close to the skin and that it will keep the transformation at bay. Will is appropriately skeptical but takes it anyway. There's no such thing as a free lunch though, and the doctor asks a favour in return. He says he's old as fuck and would really appreciate it if Will would kindly pass him along his newfound gift. Will nopes the fuck out of there and goes home, where he picks up a familiar scent from his wife's coat. He scuttles his ass down the road to his buddy Stuart's house, where he finds his wife. He also bites Stuart on the hand here. I wonder if that's going to be important later on. Later that evening, he heads out for an eventful night on the town, where he steals some handcuffs from Ross Geller doing policeman cosplay at the zoo. And then he tears the fingers off a would-be mugger. Next morning, Will is feeling better than ever. He goes to work and threatens his boss with mutiny, saying that several top authors will leave the house if he's fired. The boss is so impressed by Will's dick swinging that he gives him his old job back. Will follows Stuart into the bathroom and breaks the news to him over a friendly pissing contest. Stuart, who has literally been the worst friend since Judas, starts pleading with Will not to fire him and then gets belligerent when Will tells him to shove it. Will appropriately responds by pissing all over his shoes. While washing his hands afterwards, Will finds a pair of fingers in his pocket and quickly realises that this werewolf shit is getting out of hand. That evening, realising that she backed the wrong horse, Will's wife blindsides him in the lobby of his hotel, begging him to take her back. Will twists the knife and tells her to get to stepping. Laura and Will have plans for dinner. She comes to his hotel room to find that he has handcuffed himself to the radiator. He tells her that he thinks he's dangerous and that she should get away. She's like, "Bitch, please, you old as fuck and couldn't overpower me if you tried." She picks the cuffs using a bobby pin, and then they make passionate love for several seconds. Laura falls asleep and Will takes another trip out on the town in wolf mode, because nothing works up an appetite like a minute and a half of knocking boots. The next morning, Will is back in bed with Laura and the police arrive at his door to tell him that his wife has been brutally murdered. Believing himself to be a killer, Will is distraught. Laura suddenly realises maybe this dude is dangerous after all. She drives him to her father's estate that evening and locks him in the horse stable. Will is wearing his medallion but struggling to keep his inner animal suppressed. Laura is summoned to the police station to give a statement about her evening with Will the night before. She goes, and while in the waiting room she's greeted by Stuart, acting creepy as fuck.
What an interesting scent you have, Miss. At once new and familiar, very familiar.
She notices the bandage on his hand and asks him if he was bitten.
Were you bitten?
What an odd question. What a very odd question.
Spader does a great job of acting feral in this scene. It actually sends shivers down your back. At this moment, Laura realizes that everything Will has been saying about all this wolf shit is absolutely true. Stuart asks her to go for a drink after they give their statements, and she says, absolutely. And then as soon as he's called into the office, she makes like Christian and bails. When Stuart emerges and discovers she's left, he hops in his car and gives chase. When he arrives at the Alden estate, he assaults Laura in the barn. Will, realizing that he cannot escape the stable in human form, sacrifices his chance at remaining human to save the woman he loves. He tears off the medallion, and that 5 o'clock shadow turns into a luscious mane of grade A wolf hair. He leaps over the top of the cage, and a hilarious fight scene takes place between Jack and Spader's stunt doubles. We even get to see Schmames Schmader getting battered across the face with a fire extinguisher, because why not? Laura tries to run away and trips over a dead security guard outside the stable. Stuart grabs a garden shears and leaps through the air at Will. Laura takes the security guard's gun and busts several caps into Stuart. Cue the most hilariously edited death scene of all time. Stuart's corpse mutates back into human form and Will and Laura embrace. Will sees his own hand and is shocked at just how quickly he's hit werewolf puberty. Embarrassed by his transformed appearance, he runs away into the woods nearby, where he changes into a wolf for goodsies. The police arrive and our story ends with Laura exhibiting heightened senses of her own as well as glowing eyes in much the same manner as our boy Will had earlier in the movie. Looks like these two are going to be reunited in the very near future. Wolf is just fascinating. It's well written, incredibly well cast, and it meanders back and forth between being amusing, intriguing, and unsettling several times throughout. The tension and suspense builds nicely throughout the movie, with the key message being that the spirit of the wolf doesn't necessarily make someone an evil killing machine, but it rather simply heightens the personality traits that a person already has within. Good people will not necessarily become evil en route to transforming into a wolf, but you can guarantee that bad people will become heinous. The climax is a little bit shoddy and not exactly helped by the obvious cuts to stunt doubles, but what can you do, I suppose? Jack Nicholson was already 57 years old at this stage, so it would have been fairly unreasonable to expect him to be leaping off tree branches and chucking pitchforks and fire extinguishers around the gaff. Everything else is really solid here though, and if you're looking for a werewolf story with a twist, then look no further.